Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
No, thanks for inviting me, Harv. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've been looking forward to this for a couple of months since you invited me.
Thank you so much. You describe yourself as a finance guy who doesn't really do a great deal of finance. Tell me what you meant by that.
Okay. So what I mean is, well, let me take you back a little bit. I've always been fascinated by the way things work. So growing up as a child, I was the kind of annoying kid that we kept on asking why, until my parents bought me a set of encyclopedias and I buried my head in those. But when I was at school, I tended to sort of start to learn about systems. And I basically realized that systems created outcomes. Businesses, of course, are complex systems. And moving into accountancy, what I'd hoped is the numbers would tell me and explain the business. Sadly, they didn't. But what they did reveal were the outcomes. So they kind of tell you where the pain occurred, but they wouldn't actually tell you what the source was. So as an accountant, I use the numbers as a diagnostic tool, basically. So what I tend to do is I look at the numbers and then I go upstream to find the root cause. So once I've found that root cause, then I redesign the system. So I don't really see myself as a finance guy that produces finance information. Mm-hmm. I think of myself as somebody who basically redesigns operating systems so that the financial outcomes will be improved.
I love that. So you're at Lucid Group now, and let's set the scene. Tell us about the size and the makeup. Maybe when you joined back in 2020 and versus what it looks like today.
Okay, so Lucid is a private equity-backed business. When I joined in February 2020, they were operating from the UK, the US and Singapore. Mm-hmm. So I'll contrast 2020 to 2025. So in 2020, they had about 211 employees. Mm-hmm. They've almost doubled that now to 405. Mm-hmm. Back then we had 25 legal entities. We've actually rationalized that down to 15. Revenue back then was 31 million. It's now 76 million. And our EBITDA in 2020 was 3.6 million. It's now 18.1 million. Mm-hmm. So I guess the two statistics that really jump out the page really is we've more than doubled revenue, but our EBITDA has increased fivefold. And yeah, that would be, a headline would be it's a growth story, but I think that's an operating model story. Mm. A lot of businesses can grow their revenue, of course, but not many businesses can grow their revenue without the challenges of friction, diluting profitability. And really, that's what I've been spending the last 5 years doing at Lucid, is actually trying to redesign the system so that friction doesn't actually consume its profits.
Mm. That is such an amazing transformation. We're going to dig into that in more detail. But can you tell us, when you arrived back in 2020, what did you walk into? What were the challenges you were seeing?
It was very challenging. So I joined in February 2020, and I guess for starters, the finance team, they were working incredibly hard. But what I found was that the systems and the processes just were working against them. So I joined, actually on Valentine's Day, on the 14th of February, and the company hadn't even closed December at that point. So as I started to investigate different tasks and activities in finance, I found that revenue recognition, for example, wasn't reliable because we had data scattered amongst many systems. What was the other thing I saw? Our billing accuracy was very poor. That meant clients weren't paying us on time. Therefore, our cash flow was suffering as a consequence of that. I found the AP team and their processes weren't particularly effective. And what that then meant was we had suppliers putting us on hold. But I think the biggest thing that really alarmed me, Harv, was the fact that leaders were making decisions using data that was stale and outdated. So I could see that finance was struggling, but finance was just the place where basically these issues were coming to a head. The numbers were actually making them visible, but it wasn't really driven by finance actually as being the cause. And I guess as I thought about it more, I looked at it and I thought, well, yes, you could think these are isolated problems, but actually, on the whole, the issue was that the operating model that had taken Lucid a long, long way, they've acquired lots of businesses and done really well, was just basically not robust enough to actually take them to the next level. So they basically outgrown that operating model, and it was in desperate need of a redesign.
Mm-hmm. When you refer to operating model in that context, what kinds of things do you mean? Is it the systems and the processes? Can you just elaborate on that a bit?
I'll summarize it in 5 pillars. That's probably the easiest way. So one core element of the operating model is the decision architecture. So does everybody know who makes the decision and what the authority rights are? So that's the first one. The second one, I would say, is data and information flow. Who owns that element of data? I don't know about you, but I've been in many companies where finance is saying they own something and the delivery team say they own the same number, for example. You don't have one version of the truth. The next thing I think about is process integration. So that is, how is the workload moving, not just within a function, but across functions as well? Again, what you're trying to do is make everything very efficient, and you want to avoid any sort of duplication of effort. The other thing I would say is control and governance. You've got to have a matrix in place, a structure in place, so we know, or you know, if it's, say, for example, this invoice is this value, who signs it off? Or if this decision needs to be made, who approves it? Or how many people sign that off? And then the final thing I think about is, has the company got that capacity for change? For example, transformation. If you're undergoing a project, will that succeed or fail? Sometimes you can see that before you actually implement. Yeah. If you implement in AI, will that succeed or fail? If you buy a new company, will that integrate seamlessly and be successful? But I think those are probably the 5 pillars that I consider when I'm thinking about the operating model.
Right. I think there's an assumption that people have that the bigger the company, the bigger the headcounts, the bigger the revenue, it must mean that they're run really well. And, what's your view on that?
But to be honest, I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions in business. Having worked in some huge companies, and just here's one example. You probably haven't had the opportunity, but I have had the opportunity to go into the storeroom of some of these major designer brands. It is carnage behind there, basically. The front of the store that everybody can see is beautiful, and it's, a lot of money is being invested in there. You've got boxes all over the place. You've got clothes scattered everywhere. And I think that's the kind of the facade that people see, is they presume that because it all looks shiny on the outside, everything internally is correct. But the reality is, for every company, your business is evolving faster than your operating model. So it will take you so far to a particular stage of growth, but you do have to review it. I mean, I'm thinking of Kaizen is the phrase that comes to my mind, that you're also always going to have to constantly improve. And that's why I say, and it's a phrase that I use often these days, is businesses don't fail to grow, they fail to absorb their growth.
You were saying that you design an operating model for the scale you're at rather than necessarily where you want to be. At least that's the situation people end up in.
Yes.
So how do you actually build an operating model that can scale then?
So it takes planning, it takes a bit of vision, of course, but I think an operating model that can scale is one your business is going to become more complex. That's a given. As you grow, it's going to become more complex. You're going to have more clients, hopefully, more transactions. You may have more staff. You may have more processes. So complexity is a byproduct of growth. But what you want to try and avoid is that complexity creating friction. So that's the kind of thought process that I go through is are we building something that as we scale, it either reduces friction or the friction stays at that current level? So characteristics that I'm thinking of when I'm looking at a business is things like, are your decisions becoming faster or slower? I've been in a startup of one myself. I've been in startups growing from 4 upwards, nothing to 1 million turnover in a year. And what you don't want to do is slow down your decision making. Another thing that you find as businesses grow is information ceases to become trusted. Somebody has an opinion over there, another function has an opinion over here. you need your processes to integrate. So you want work to move seamlessly, basically. The more efficient that is, the more profitable you're going to be, the more cash you're going to generate, because you can build things much quicker.
Mhm.
And also you want your controls to become stronger. So what I mean by that is you want to be able to be in a position where as you grow, you're using systems and processes to actually help you. So, you're small, maybe you can check every invoice, but as
Mhm.
you grow, you want the systems to be flowing invoices through and actually checking them. If you've got purchase orders, matching them, posting them, things like that. So,
Mhm.
and also you want your business to become adaptable. So as you add people, as you add clients, as you restructure your company, as you do M&A, you want that to be absorbed by the company, not, okay, something like that means you have to do a complete redesign.
Mhm.
So, for example, at Lucid, if we acquire a new company, to spin that company up across all our finance systems probably takes us less than a morning to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is incredible. I was expecting to say a week or something, but that.
Yeah. So yeah, and we built the system that way. For example, like
Mm.
the accounting system, it literally is a copy paste, and we have a template company. So all I've got to do is company name, address, branding. If I need to put a logo in there,
Yeah.
it consolidates all the way through into the group accounts.
Amazing.
Everything is structured that way. So it's future proofing these things and thinking about where do you want to be, and then working backwards and building the operating model that can support that.
Mhm. Incredible. So you were meant to come in for a 4-month assignment at Lucid, but 6 years later, you're still there. What happened?
They can't get rid of me. It actually was supposed to be a 4-month assignment. So I was actually brought in as a contractor,
Okay.
and I was brought in to actually implement an accounting system
Mhm.
across it was the 25 companies at the time. I was hired by the CFO, and we had a fantastic relationship, to be honest with you. So we talked a lot about finance, but we also talked a lot about the business. And what he would do is, he'd tell me about the growth aspirations of the company. But as we're talking about it, in the background, we're both thinking, but it's a struggle now, to be honest with you. How can we take more on with the operating model we've got? So it was clear that something needed to change. And I'll be honest with you, I guess what struck me was that the board recognized the fact that they couldn't take incremental baby steps. If they really wanted to invest as they did, acquire more companies and really scale this business, it wasn't tweaking at the edges. This needed a redesign of the elements we discussed earlier. And that's pretty well what I've spent the last 5 years doing. So as I said, I was brought in to do the accounting system. I think the next thing they asked me to do was to simplify the legal entities. So we took the UK trading entities down from 5 separate companies down to 1. So that simplified all our billing. It simplified all the intercompany. It reduced all our compliance costs because we didn't have to audit 5 companies, and it reduced a lot of friction. And then pretty soon after that, they created this group finance director role and offered it to me, and here I am.
Andrew, you were sharing some slides with me previously when we hopped on a call that set some nice context about what you, after you came in, you assessed the situation, you determined some of the stuff that needs to be done, what you communicated to the team, and so on. So if you don't mind, I'd love for us to walk through that together and you kind of explain, take us through that.
Sure. Okay. Well, first I'll start with just to say that these slides that I've shared with you were first presented in November 2020. So I'd done my contract period. They then awarded me the full-time role. And my first team presentation was these 4 slides.
Mm.
And these slides I still present every quarter to the team, just to remind them of the journey we've been on. And actually, just to keep us aligned and ensure that everybody is bought into the vision. So the first slide was my vision. And basically what I was trying to demonstrate to the guys is there is a path for us to create more value to the business, but everything needed to be built on a solid foundation, which was going to be our new accounting system, which I was in the process of putting in. And my view was that once we had an accounting system, we could produce timely, accurate, and reliable data. And what that does is build trust in finance. And then once people trusted the data, we could then improve our reporting. And then once we had good reporting, of course, we could, pointed, once we had good reporting, of course, we could start analysing the data, producing things like client profitability, project profitability, utilisation analysis, time analysis, etc. And then basically, we can then start to use that data to create dashboards, insights, and improve decision support. So the destination was never really to improve reporting, it was to improve our information. Because to me, once we have better information, it will lead to better decisions, which would drive better performance.
And so at the time, like pulling together information like this in the business was virtually impossible or just very, very painful?
Virtually impossible.
Yeah.
Virtually impossible. We had multiple systems. We had a myriad of companies. We had the delivery team have a view of, say, for example, I don't know, utilization. Their number is X, finance's number is Y, for example. Trying to reconcile work in progress to do revenue recognition. Again, we needed governance around, how far progressed has this project been for us to work out the actual revenue we could recognize. So all of that work had to be done in tandem with the operations team to ensure that we're all aligned, we're all looking at the same data. We might be looking at it from our respective lenses, but there is one single version of the truth, which we all believe in and we all trust.
You know, what's interesting, Andrew, is that I think you already had 200 something employees at that time in the business. So
Yeah.
I think hearing your diagnosis is, well, to me, it's surprising that an organization was that large and that successful, but there was such a lack of visibility around this stuff. Surprising, I think. I don't know if you want to add a comment to that. Maybe it was surprising to you too, or not.
It was surprising, but I think what you find, Harv, is that success kind of masks a lot of operational problems. When you're doing well and you're growing, everybody just sees the revenue going up, the profit going up. The reality is profit could have been increasing a lot faster.
Right.
So I think sometimes you're victim of your own success and you don't actually see what's really going on. And M&A is a difficult one because when you're buying new companies, you've bought another company, there's another culture.
Yeah.
They're working in their own system. Their numbers and even their reporting structure doesn't quite align. So you kind of, it's kind of okay. So people accept all of that. Whereas what we now have is one standard across even our chart of accounts. We only have one chart of accounts. Every company in the group follows that same structure.
And as we go through this, Andrew, like for somebody listening, businesses of all sizes, but when do you think, in terms of, is there a certain size in terms of headcount or revenue where people need to really start getting these better foundations in place?
Personally, I would try and do it as quickly as you can. I started a company with 3 partners. We started at £65,000. I spent £16,000 of that £65,000 of startup capital on our accounting system. It enabled us to grow to a £3 million turnover with myself and assistants.
Right.
So the efficiencies we gained from having that, and of course our customers were blue chip retailers, so they expected a certain quality and level of billing and visibility. When they rung up about a service issue, I could tell them, for example, well, this component's on the right side of your door. If you go there, so this is what the system gave us, as opposed to running around like headless chickens without a clue, basically.
Yeah.
So it's a worthwhile investment. I would do it as soon as you can, but also you've got to be realistic. If you're growing, you're going to have to constantly evolve, basically, and try and stay ahead of the complexity because it will slow the business down.
Really, really good advice. I think a lot of businesses end up playing catch up because they postpone the decisions and keep kind of clinging to that old operating model, old processes, systems, and just hoping it'll work. And then it becomes a bigger challenge to untangle.
Absolutely right.
That much
Absolutely
harder.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a look at your second slide. So for people listening, maybe you can just tell us what we're looking at and then talk us through it.
Okay. So the second slide is my view of our strategy as a finance function. So traditionally, finance spends a lot of time talking about and explaining what happened. I really wanted us to evolve from, well, my statement to that is, if we're only talking about what happened, realistically, the company could outsource finance, to be perfectly honest with you. The value is in explaining why it happened, what will happen, what can we do, and also what lies ahead. Because that's really where we're taking the company on the journey from hindsight to insight to foresight. That's when we stop becoming a reporting function and we become a decision support function. And that's where the value lies in what we can do and what we can contribute. So that was the vision, really. We were barely managing to say what happened when I joined. Currently, I've got an extension to this chart now where I'm now trying to talk about AI and tools like that, of how we can actually look beyond the horizon using AI and tools like that to help us be much more analytical. But yeah, that was the vision, is to take the team from let's not spend all our time looking in the rearview mirror. Let's look out the windscreen and really help the company steer a path towards a greater success. One thing, I'm stealing this quote from somebody I used to work with at Vodafone, but one thing he used to say is, and he was in finance, he used to say, finance have done their job when they're at that top table supporting the business. And no serious meeting takes place without somebody saying, hey, I want somebody from finance around the table. That's really when we are valued and we have worth in the company. So that's really what I wanted us to do and to be, is a team that if something's taking place, a major decision, we are at that table contributing to that decision.
Excellent. So Andrew, in your next slide, you talk about kind of the tech stack that you put in place. Maybe you could talk us through what you did there.
So to deliver that vision and to execute the strategy, my view is that everything had to be connected. One of the challenges we had when I was there, of course, was we had all these desperate systems around the company. But to me, everything had to be connected, because that was the only way that we were going to become efficient and much more accurate. So basically, Business Central was the core of our system. Our project management system fed into that. That feeds in via an API. So the beauty of an API, of course, is as soon as somebody presses the button to raise an invoice, that feeds directly straight into Business Central. We send it out via EDI to our clients. So all of our billing errors, wrong company, wrong currency, VAT when we shouldn't, no VAT when we should, eliminated overnight, basically. No human interaction. If the project is set up correct, then the invoice goes out correct. And of course, that therefore means the customer receives it. There's no challenge. We wait in our business, most of our customers are on 90-day terms. Then we get paid immediately. I think at the end of June, I think we had 968K's worth of early payments from customers.
Wow.
So we have gone from a situation where our debtors ledger was a complete mess and we didn't know what's going on, to now most months we have sub 2 or 3% past due at any month end.
That's
Everybody pays on time. Everybody pays on time.
Shocking. I've never heard anybody say that. So that's really, really impressive.
So that's kind of the journey we've been on. But I guess when I joined, we had the PSA system. We had that in place. So that was a given. I had to accept that was the system and I needed to plug into that. So that was a given. Our payroll feeds in via flat file. We've implemented SAP Concur, which most people regard as the leading expense management system. That's entered via an API. So again, somebody raises a claim, it codes that claim, it posts that claim, it pays that claim. Nobody in my team touches that, basically.
Wow.
All of that happens seamlessly. And on top of it, we've got an FP&A system, so we can do all our planning, all our reporting, all our forecasting. And then we have another tool called Jet Reports, which is a nice tool that enables us to consolidate multiple companies in one Excel. So it's just much more efficient for our reporting. And then the other future project was going to be automated AP, but now with the government pushing ahead with e-invoicing, we're going to put that on hold until we understand what the government direction is, because otherwise we'll put something in which we might have to strip out.
When you were designing this, then you had your PSA, which means you knew what you needed to work with and what kind
Yes.
of APIs or connectors were available and whatnot. When it comes to these systems, at a very high level, what are your key requirements?
Well, what we do as a finance team, everybody's involved. We do case studies. So everybody will do a case study for what they have in mind and what they think they see that we need. And then we basically evaluate it. So it's not a case of looking at it thinking AI is the sexy thing, we'll do AI, or it's process automation. What I look at is, whether this will help us do it better, faster, cheaper. That's they're the first criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives us, at least from a business case perspective, the fact that we could argue that there are efficiency gains. The next thing we look at is effectiveness. Effectiveness is more a case of, what does this process actually enable us to do? So some things, for example, like our VAT, it was a manual process, our group VAT. It used to take 4 hours. It now takes an hour. So we've shaved a ton of time off of that. Decision quality. One thing that I'm big on, if you haven't realized right now, is quality information improves the quality of decisions. So that's something that I feel is very important. And probably the fourth thing that I think a lot of people overlook is capability. So as you can imagine, doing all of this, and if we scroll back to the first slide in terms of the vision, what this has done is taken away all the mundane, repetitive tasks, which means my team can spend more time on analysing data and business partnering and actually working with the company as opposed to in our little silo, just processing transactions. So that's much more satisfying and much more fulfilling for the team. And basically we have capacity we never had. So that's the kind of, I think those are probably the four things that I look at when I'm looking at a system and where it is in the hierarchy of an implementation plan.
Andrew, why don't we move into your last slide where I think you're talking about your core values?
Yeah, so this one was for the team. So obviously it's not about reporting, but it was about identity. As I said, the team were working hard. I don't think they were probably as appreciated as they should because everybody was seeing the problems accumulating in finance, not realizing that some of these were actually coming upstream into the finance function. So I wanted the team to have an identity. I think that's important. I also wanted the team to understand kind of what's important to us. If you've got a decision to make, look at this slide and this will be your North Star, basically. So of course, as a finance function, it's critical that we protect the assets for the shareholders. We need to manage risk. We need to accurately report. We need to be an efficient and effective function. Nobody's going to throw money at us, basically. We're going to have to prove value for money. But where we start to add value is in the performance management. Again, as I said, I want us to be there helping the business drive better performance. And the business partnering side of things is important because, again, that's more value. That's where we're providing insights, analytics, thought leadership. We're on the top table now in the core meetings. And my target and my goal is to ensure that I build a strong team. So that's hiring the right people, developing them and investing in them. So, so that's basically the sum of it. I mean, to be honest with you, that I guess the measure of whether this has been successful, not only in the metrics in terms of the performance and the efficiencies, is our average tenure in finance is 6.2 years now. So I think it's worked and everybody is fairly happy with the journey we've been on.
One of my favorite things in what you just said is that one of the values of the finance team is to share thought leadership. And that's not something you hear very often. Can you explain what you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, I'll tell you a story first and then I'll come back. Hopefully the story might help. So when I was at Vodafone, so I was part of the Vodafone team that acquired cable and wireless worldwide. Then we had an integration meeting. So there was a bunch of guys from cable and wireless who understood the fixed infrastructure. Then you had the Vodafone people like me who understood mobile technology. So we're in an integration meeting and talking about various issues. And I walked out of the meeting and I came out with a guy, his name's Ed from Cable and Wireless. And he turned to me and said, "Did you see that? None of those Vodafone guys had a clue about fixed." And I thought, that's it. That's what I want my team to do and the team to be. So it's not just a case of understanding the numbers, it's understanding the business and using the numbers to communicate to the business. So he thought I was a cable and wireless guy, a fixed guy, but I just invested my time getting under the skin of the cable and wireless business so that I could contribute. So that's the thought leadership. So it's using our data, using, market analysis, just pulling everything together so that, we can actually basically, we have a good understanding of the business, we have a good understanding of the environment, and we can contribute to meaningful conversations at a higher level.
Andrew, that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing all of that. Now, let's switch topics or switch gears a little bit to AI. There's a belief that I hear a lot. I mentioned this in the introduction to the episode, that AI will be that thing that take all your messy data and all the problems that you've highlighted at Lucid Group when you came in, for example, go away, that you can plug it in on top of whatever you've got and get those answers, get it to do everything for you. I mean, you started this journey at Lucid before AI was part of the conversation. And so what's your view on all of this?
It worries me because it's nigh impossible that AI is going to fix that. Basically, if you've got messy data, then AI is never going to address that. And I think a lot of people talk about AI readiness, and everybody is, every new release of an LLM or an upgrade to ChatGPT, all people are, there's loads of stuff on LinkedIn about prompts, etc. But I think that question is too low in the stack. Really, what you need to do is build an environment that a machine can read and understand. As you saw by our architecture, having that was the reward, that we could actually layer AI over that. I think every operational activity kind of leaves a data footprint. So a sale leaves one, a timesheet leaves one, purchase order leaves one, an invoice leaves one. If you have all this data in fragmented systems, then AI is not going to have a complete view of your business. So AI is not going to help you solve that. AI is not going to solve your problems. All AI is going to do is magnify that and help you reach the wrong conclusion faster. If all your data is not connected, then you are in serious trouble. And if your data is not clean, as you mentioned, then that's a serious problem. So what we did, and as I mentioned earlier, is we ensured that we had one single source of the truth. We ensured that we had an environment that a machine could read and understand. So no, we weren't preparing for AI. We were preparing for better decisions. But AI was that reward that we got for actually building a solid foundation.
When you say single source of truth, I mean, the stack we looked at had multiple systems, but you've tried to consolidate that as much as possible, remove as much stuff floating around in spreadsheets as much as possible, and then try to ensure that all of this is deeply automated and connected. Is that right?
That's kind of right, but we have single sources of truth. So accounting data, a single source of truth in the accounting system.
Got you.
Project delivery data is in the PSA system. Expenses data is in Concur, for example.
Got you.
There's only one version of those. So, for example, I'll try and describe it. So you have the PSA has project number data. Of course, if somebody submits an expense claim, they need that project number to put against it. Every night, the API sucks the data out of the PSA into Business Central, out of Business Central, into Concur. So by the morning, if you set up a project today, by tomorrow morning, that project number will be there for you to submit your claim against. So there's only one version of that project, and that project number, it's in the PSA.
Okay.
That's what I mean by single source of the truth.
That makes sense. Andrew, so we launched this report this spring called the Maturity Gap Report and found that, I mean, it was shocking that only 13% of firms that completed the survey said they'd automated any meaningful part of how they work. And that's a sharp contrast to yourselves. You were telling me that you've done an internal assessment, and now it's something like 44% of everything you do in finance is either automated or AI assisted. So talk us through some of the benefits of the work you've done, particularly when it comes to automation AI. I think you've highlighted some examples there about data flows, but can you
Okay.
talk us through that?
I'll share an infographic with you, Harv, that you can share with your listeners, viewers,
Hmm.
both. But as I guess for transparency, what I would say is that AI and automation, as we've discussed, wasn't the objective. It wasn't ChatGPT, it wasn't even a thing back then. The objective was to basically create more value by supporting better decisions. What AI has done is it's created a mechanism to help us get there faster. So, as I said, better, faster, cheaper is really the key there. But I don't want to run through those issues again, but if we look at the infographic, let me just pick some things out there. So a new FP&A system sitting on top of everything. We stripped out the existing one we had. That generated a total cost of ownership savings of 3 years. I talked about effectiveness earlier. So we have a custom GPT that checks our W8s and W9s. That's a US IRS tax requirement.
Hmm.
So again, that is checking everything consistently. If a human does that, they'll miss one thing or miss another. That is 100% consistent. So that means that the system's checked it. If that comes back and confirms that that form's okay, our compliance with the IRS is okay. We've got no issues there. So that's a case of being more effective. I talked about the VAT one, Concur expense claim. As I said, even for the delivery folk who are, of course, billing and charging their time, having a system that now means that they can photograph the receipt, it posts it to an expense claim. They pay on the company card, it matches it to that expense. They don't have to do any of that now. I did a survey with the team and they were saying they were saving about 15 to 30 minutes per expense claim. So that's 15 to 30 minutes more billable hours, basically. Yeah. So that's another fantastic achievement. Travel tracker, there's always more compliance finance have to adhere to. And global mobility is one of those. So we've built an automated workflow that if you're going overseas, you just send an email and then the system reads that email, populates an Excel spreadsheet. And at the end of tax year, I just use that to work out our global mobility tax liability, if any. So again, nobody's spending any time on that at all. It's as opposed to without it, AI and automation, I'd be saying, I need more people. I need more staff. We can't cope.
Right.
And as I said, in terms of AI agent adoption, as you can see there, 5 of the 8 members of the team are using autonomous agents, and 44% of everything we do has an element of automation or AI supporting it.
That's incredible. Let's talk about the kind of the culture element. You've talked about it being harder than the systems aspect of kind of implementation and all that kind of stuff. What does changing the culture of the team actually require? Or in your case, what did it require?
It was hard. And I'd actually thought the actual implementation would be the difficult part, to be honest with you, but the culture was much harder. I guess technology is logical, but people are emotional. So even trying to demonstrate that this will be beneficial for somebody, if they're not there in their headspace, then they're not going to buy into it. And these guys have gone through years of frustration. They've been working really hard. As I said, the systems weren't helping them succeed. So before I could change anything and get them on board, I had to build trust with those guys. So those 4 slides, they only look like 4 slides, but they took me a very, very, very long time to create them, because I didn't want them to see this as just another presentation. That was my promise to them. My commitment to them is, you do this and this is what we'll achieve. We work together and this is where we'll be. It's the rising tide. That tide rises, we'll all benefit as a consequence of it. So what I was trying to do was to help them see that change was possible. And I did a workshop with them. It was based on the book by Carol Dweck called Mindset. I don't know if you've come across it. And it talks about a fixed mindset, we've always done it this way. It's never worked. No, nothing will change. To a growth mindset. Well, let's give it a try. I'm open-minded, etc., etc. So we did this workshop, and then I was able to call them out to say, you're demonstrating a bit of a fixed mindset there, aren't you?
Oh, nice.
Why don't we just test it? Why don't you just send that email this way and see what the response is? And every improvement became proof, basically. So it was just a case of taking baby steps initially, but as we gained momentum, the team saw that change was possible, and then they bought into it even more.
Mm-hmm. So 5 years ago, you were something like 15 people in your finance team, I believe, and
Yes.
you're now at 8.5 full-time
8.6, yeah, 8.6. Yes.
Handling much more in terms of transactions in a business that's something like 3 times the size. Super impressive. How does the team feel about that trajectory? Has this impacted their work-life balance, or has the work you've done just completely transformed and just made you guys so much more efficient?
So it really is down to the transformation in finance, to be honest with you. So my goal was never to reduce headcount. I was under no pressure to reduce costs or anything. My goal, and I guess from a leadership perspective, was to remove the low value, boring, monotonous number crunching that finance people have to do. So what we actually did was actually, when somebody left, we just let the systems and the processes absorb that workload. So, and the systems was doing that. We were replacing repetitive tasks with more automation with AI. So people began to focus on the more interesting tasks. Even in AP, yes, you can sit there spending your time processing invoices, or you can sit there but spending your time analyzing the number of, printers we use. How can we rationalize our printers? Can we go to tender and get a better price and narrow it down? Things like that. So we just made the roles more interesting, and then retention improved, invested in their development. So nobody's doing the same job. And so I think really it's kind of those sort of things that made the big difference and has driven our tenure to 6.2 years. And to me, that's a much better metric than headcount saving. So much more efficient. I think in 2021, we were doing, it's 283 transactions per head per month. We're now at 573 transactions per head per month. And that's measurable in the accounting system. So that's one measure I can objectively record. So yes, it's virtually doubled, but hours, nobody works really super long hours. I can't even remember when we had to work a weekend, to be honest with you. Sometimes I do because I love my job, but the team don't have to. So it's just a case of using the systems, removing the friction, and just being more efficient and doing the more value-adding jobs and tasks.
Amazing. And talking about the role of finance and when it plays in your business, this is one of the reasons, Andrew, I wanted to create the Missing Finance course, which you know about.
Yeah.
In my experience, people's eyes sometimes glaze over when there's somewhat technical financial terminology used, and then the finance person assumes everyone understands it, and you kind of lose them when you don't have a narrative in mind that helps people understand what's happening. And you've talked about linking kind of operational language to those financial outcomes, talking about utilization and recovery rather than margin and EBITDA. And so the delivery team can actually understand what's happening. It sounds like you've recognized a similar problem to what I'm describing, in that finance, when they're only talking about numbers, they're not helping everybody else. Can you just take us through that a little bit?
No, you're right. And first of all, some of my team members have done your course and they love it, actually, by the way.
Amazing.
So it's fantastic. So you're right, though. But I don't think it's just finance. I think most functions develop their own language. So yes, we talk about, what do we talk about? We talk about margin, we talk about EBITDA, we talk about cash. The delivery folk, as you said, they talk about utilization, recoverability and billing. But then you have HR, they talk about attrition and engagement. Sales are talking about pipeline, funnels and conversions. So we all are describing the same business, but through our own respective lens. I think, you're absolutely correct. So I think the problem is that in our own little worlds, we don't recognize that, or we just assume that everybody understands our language, and we don't. So this was a big hurdle we had to overcome in Lucid. I guess I quickly realized that if I stood in a delivery meeting and said to them, right, what are we going to do to improve margin? As you said, they would glaze over, they're checking their phones, they would be disinterested because they don't manage margin. But if I spoke to them about utilization, recoverability and over-servicing and project delivery, those are the behaviors that they can control. So I guess there's a little phrase that I have, I don't know if I'll deliver it well, but I think one of the most important things that leaders can do is not create more information, but they should try to create more understanding. So that is talking the same language as your counterparty. And it's something I've always tried to do. So as I mentioned with the Vodafone story, but I've worked in healthcare, and I used to go on GP visits. I used to go into hospitals to understand what are we actually, what are the service and the products we're providing. I worked for Biffa Waste Services when I first started as a trainee accountant. And I went on the half six getting up to go on bin collection to understand what is the business. And likewise in aviation, one thing that was important to me was understand how is a plane made. So I had the opportunity to go to Airbus to actually see how an aircraft is made, because then I can talk the same language as our engineers. And when they talk about the line or the FAL, I understand, or I could say those sort of terms to them. And I think, I know what he means and I know where he means. So to me, if you really want to change behavior, I don't think people change behavior because they see the numbers. They change behavior because they understand the impact of their behaviors on the performance of the business.
Andrew, you spent 35 years across, working with founders, global corporations, PE environments. If an ops or finance person is listening to this and they're sitting in a business right now that's messy, they've got that scattered data, no single source of truth, pressure to do something with AI like a lot of us are under, where should they start?
I would start by asking a couple of questions. I think the first question would be, does the current operating model, or can the current operating model absorb the impact of AI? And we talked about disconnected systems. If your systems are disconnected, if your data isn't cleansed, if you've got multiple versions of the truth, AI needs to be able to read your information and it needs to understand it. I mean, you could, dabble at the edges with a custom GPT, but if you really want to use AI and agents and, for example, incoming, support calls, for example, emails coming in, that agent being able to understand the client, the product, etc. You need a connected system. So you need connected systems, you need clean data. The system also needs to have some sort of understanding in terms of when does it decide, or when does a human decide, or where are those control points? And then ultimately I would ensure that, or I'd strive to have integrated systems. So it's probably not the easiest answer, but I think if you really want to move forward, you may have to take a step backwards, to be perfectly honest with you. But, and then ask yourself, what decisions do we need to make faster and quicker? Because there will almost certainly be one particular issue in your business right now that you're thinking, we need more clients, or it's the service calls that are killing us, or why can't we, take an order, deliver it, or ship something, or why are these projects so complex? There'll be one burning question. I would focus on that and then work backwards. That would be my approach.
Excellent advice. Andrew, this has been such a fantastic conversation, super inspiring. You're kind of setting that benchmark for a high maturity firm for the rest of us. I really appreciate you being here. I'm wondering if somebody wants to pick your brain, hopefully that's okay. And where can they reach out to you for some advice?
Okay, probably the best platform is LinkedIn. And also my website is amb-associates.com. So you can contact me via those two. But happy to help if anybody's got any questions, or if there's anything I could do to support, then be delighted to.
Excellent. We'll put a link to your website on your LinkedIn in the episode notes so people can reach out to you. But once again, Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
What a great conversation. A few things I'm taking away from that. Firstly, Andrew's framing of the role of finance. He said that if you're only ever explaining what happened, the company could outsource you. The value is in explaining why it happened, what will happen, and what lies ahead, moving from hindsight to insight to foresight, from a reporting function to a decision support function. That's a shift in identity, not just process. Andrew's view is that if you want to change behavior, people don't change because they see the numbers. They change because they understand the impact of their behaviors on the performance of the business.